Hello, everybody. Welcome to PowerViews Live. I'm Dan McDade, your host and president of PointClear. Just a moment, I'm going to introduce Dave Kurlan and Koka Sexton. PowerViews Live is designed to help you solve some of the most significant problems you're going to deal with in 2015. And today we're going to talk about why sales does not follow up on leads. Before I make the introduction, I do have a couple of housekeeping items to cover. One is there's a Q&A box on the right side of your screen for any questions that you might have, and we'll get to them as quickly as we can. Secondly, the recorded presentation will be available for replay within about 48 hours, and all registrants will receive a link at that time. If you have the time and interest, stick around for the after party. We'll start the after party immediately on conclusion of the presentation. And then lastly, the PowerPoint presentation is available. If you go to the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, for some reason you're unable to get it, please feel free to reach out to us and we'll be happy to send it to you. So without further ado, Dave, let me allow you to go ahead and introduce yourself first.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm Dave Kurlan. I'm the CEO of Objective Management Group, which is a Salesforce evaluation company. We're the leading provider of sales evaluations and sales assessments on the planet. I'm also the CEO of Kurlan and Associates, a global Salesforce development consulting firm. So I kind of pioneered the current sales development industry back in the late 80s. And I'm a sales thought leader and expert on anything selling.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Welcome to PowerViews Live. Koka?
And I'm Koka Sexton. I am a senior social marketing manager here at LinkedIn. I focus on the sales solutions business unit, and we have a product called Sales Navigator. What that is a application that was built off of the best practices of salespeople that use LinkedIn, and we created a platform that enhances all of those best practices to make salespeople more effective.
Koka, as always, thank you for joining us, and thanks for your service to the country. If you look at the very bottom of his bio, it has a little detail in it. And I'm Dan McDade. In 2014 alone, yes, sir, 2014 alone, we will have generated about $500 million in pipeline for our clients and about $100 million in closed sales. What a lot of people don't know about me is I'm an accountant by training, and I loved cost accounting, which makes me a little bit weird in most people's eyes. But we're all about metrics. We just literally measure everything, every moment. First of all, Koka, let me just throw this up to you. I think, the question is there a problem? Is there a problem with sales reps following up on leads?
We would like to say that there's not, but of course there is. I believe that there's many reasons, and I'm sure that's what we're going to get into. But I do think that there's a problem, but it's not just the sales problem. I mean, I think it's systemic in how some businesses are run. But leads aren't getting followed up on, which is why I'm glad we're part of this webcast.
Dave?
Oh, I think there's a huge problem with leads and what we're calling leads. Some of these things we're calling leads are names with email addresses, and we're handing them over to salespeople and so here's a lead. And they don't know how to prioritize. Nobody's done any pre-qualification. Nobody's figured out whether this was just somebody wanted some free stuff or a download, or they're curious, or they're actually in the market now or sometime in the future, or they're a competitor, or they're a student doing research. So all that stuff is in the bucket being called leads right now. So it's no wonder that salespeople are saying, our leads suck. Why do you want me to follow up on this stuff? And marketing is saying, look at all these leads we gave you last month. Why aren't you doing anything with them? So yeah, it's a serious problem, Dan.
I won't mention the company, but there's one of the largest software companies in the world. I called out to their 10 biggest partners, and I said, what do you think of the leads you're getting? And they said, well, they suck. I said, well, why don't you, ask them to fix that? And they said, we're afraid they'll stop sending us leads. So I think to some extent, organizations are creating their own problems there. I think this slide, to me, really sums it up for Marketo. And basically what you see here are two lines. One of them is what the sales reps assume happens with leads. The leads are ready to close at the front end of the process, and then they start to tail off. Whereas, in fact, what happens is there's about the same number of leads are closing every month. In fact, for the first 2 years, you can assume you're going to close a lot of the leads over that period of time. But Dave, do you see this in your travels? Does this ring true with you as far as your clients and prospects are concerned?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different sets of expectations and a couple of different sets of actual experiences. And, the thing we haven't talked about is the fact that salespeople give up because since a lot of these leads aren't really yet leads, they make their first couple attempts and nothing happens, nobody responds. And at 3 or 4 attempts, salespeople go, crappy lead, and they ignore it. And even though there's a statistic out
Give
there,
them a
and
lot
it's
of
loud
credit a couple of times.
everywhere, it says it takes 10 to 15 attempts to reach
Yeah.
that prospect, even when they're interested. So that's why the graph looks the way it looks. A lot of the interested people aren't even being reached.
Yeah,
Dave,
I
we're
think
getting
that
a comment. Your volume, Dave, is just a little bit light. We're getting that comment. Go ahead, Koka.
I was going to say, and that isn't necessarily just a sales problem. I mean, this is where sales and marketing need to get more aligned. And the idea of segmenting these leads and understanding, a lead funnel and not just the sales funnel. And how does that marketing funnel then align with sales? Just because we generate leads, I mean, granted, the conversation about buying lists, you guys know how I feel about that. But when you're generating leads as a company and understanding where those people are in the top or the middle or the bottom of the marketing funnel, and when do you make that handoff to sales? You can't hand everything off to sales, and that's why salespeople get upset. I mean, when I was in sales, that's why I hated it, and I didn't really like marketers. You know what I mean? I mean, it was just, we were getting a lot of stuff that didn't mean anything. And, what marketing needs to do, what sales and marketing need to align to is understand when does that handoff happen and what needs to happen, before that to make sure that it's an actually qualified person that a salesperson should be touching.
Cook, I know I have my answer to that question or this question, but why does that happen? I mean, we all talk about this. We talk about the lack of alignment. I think we've been talking about it since 1993, but that's the oldest article I found on the subject. But, why is this continuing to happen? Why do companies allow it to happen? That sounds indicting, but what do you think?
Well, I think that sales and marketing, they're beginning to now more so in the past, but they're measured on different things. A lot of marketers, I mean, it's still fairly new when I go into different organizations where marketing actually carries a bag, where they're responsible for a number. Typically marketing is looked at, well, how many leads did you actually create? And so they're looking at just that layer. Well, we generated 50,000 leads, but not looking at it how, holding the marketer accountable to how that actually produces. Trying to make some optimization in it. But at the end of the day, it comes back down to revenue for a business. And if sales isn't seeing that revenue, they're not going to see the value in the marketing team.
And there's another piece, and that is that salespeople, pretty much 74% of them, suck. And that includes their ability to follow up on even a good lead. They suck at that. And those are actual statistics. 74% of them suck. So
That's the technical term for it.
at follow up to a good lead, what about all these marginal they could be leads, or they might be leads in the future? How bad are they at trying to make a call that would convert one of those leads? So there's a lot of data points in this that are all contributing, maybe not equally, but contributing nonetheless to why we have the problem.
And I think it's a best practice for companies to understand what that looks like. Is how many contacts does it typically take in a buying cycle for you to make that happen? And a lot of companies don't measure that, because when you do start measuring it, depending on the organization you look at, you realize that there is, it's science. It takes a certain number of times to actually reach out to these people to get them to, even if they're very interested, for them to actually pay attention because everybody's so busy. And once you start measuring that and you can drive to those metrics, you start realizing that there's a tipping point and you actually start more of these deals in.
There's your friend and mine probably, Craig Rosenberg, I think is a great blogger, and I want to read a couple of quotes from Craig, and what you just said, Koka, just is a great segue into this. I'm going to read 4 quotes here, and then I'll turn it over to you guys. But he starts with what you just said, that it takes up to 15 touches to generate a qualified lead, and that is not something you want your expensive bag-carrying sales reps working on. Instead, you want them focused on closing business. That seems to make a lot of sense. The second quote is taking a raw inquiry And creating a qualified lead is really hard work, but it does get better as you optimize that process, which you really can only do if you isolate the process and allow for continuous improvement in the process, which is certainly helped by pre-qualifying leads or an inside sales type function. This third quote is, it's amazing how many times I hear how marketers don't get data because they don't put it into the CRM. Sales doesn't put it into the CRM. With the dedicated lead qualification team, you get data and real data that will help you optimize the program going forward. And then finally, he says his last point on the slide is, I didn't invent this. This process has been around for years because it works. Your thoughts, guys?
Well, we just completed a new white paper on the modern science behind Salesforce excellence. And we did a 3-month-long study of companies of all sizes and all industries. And the timing of this is perfect because 32% of the companies are converting better than 40% of their, that's it, yeah. I think it's 32% are converting better than 40% of their leads to conversations. And on the bottom end, the companies are converting less than 20%. And there are measurable differences between what the companies who are making it work are doing and what the companies who are not getting it to work are doing. But the companies that are converting them at better than 40%, they've got shorter sales cycles, higher win rates, significant increases in sales, and a lot of it comes down to the training that they're doing.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, this is the reason why modern sales organizations break their sales teams into different parts. You know, back to the point of what Craig was saying, you don't want your expensive reps doing all this kind of manual work of actually creating the buzz or getting in touch with these people. You know, sales reps fall into a few different buckets, and it depends on their maturity and, you know, their experience within the market. You know, modern sales organizations have an SD org or a sales development org where that's their job, either inbound or outbound work. And they're creating those activities to get people on the hook. And when you find somebody, when they finally have a moment to invest their time into learning about this product or service, if they've done their due diligence and actually educated this buyer in that process of trying to figure out when is a good time to set up the meeting or the demo, you realize that when you hand that over to the sales rep, it's, you know, almost a done deal. It's just a matter of finally moving them through that end part of the process. And, you know, having a solid SD organization, these sales development, that are constantly doing more of the volume and leveraging technology in the right way, so it's not still just, you know, a batch and blast or, you know, a bunch of cold outreaches and voicemails. You know, there's other ways to go about this that are a lot more optimized, that you realize that your pipeline actually grows bigger, and the salespeople who are actually trying to close the business are having an easier time doing it.
Hey, one of the audience had a question. I think this is a good time to interject it. The question was, why doesn't the feedback loop work from sales back to marketing regarding the quality of leads? I think that's a classic one. I would guess that may be a marketing person that asked that question, but what do you guys, what's your answer to that?
Well, I would say somebody's not listening. You know, being a data-driven organization, you need to look at the data. And when you have you know, the sales leadership, the marketing leadership, the CFO all in a room and looking at the numbers and the data of where things are coming from and what's actually closing and how that's getting segmented, there's no denying it. And if you get executive sponsorship across the business as to where you need to move, you're going to move that way. So the feedback loop ends because somewhere in that cycle, somebody's not listening, or the data isn't suggesting that you actually need to make that movement.
Or
yeah, absolutely. And by the way, somebody brought up, Dave, and I'll turn it over to you in just a minute, but somebody mentioned that Koka, that you brought out a good point. Just because you reach out to a prospect one time doesn't mean everyone is standing up and taking notice. That's why the rep needs to be persistent, and he says, thank you very much. Dave, your comment?
I'm still going to answer the feedback loop question from the other side. Everything Koka said was perfect. However, there's one more piece, and maybe the data doesn't exist, because knowing sales forces and salespeople as I do, sales VPs and presidents and CEOs are pulling their hair out to get salespeople to use CRM and pipeline management tools. They all have it, but salespeople aren't living in it. They're not keeping their pipeline up to date. They're not updating their opportunities. So what ends up happening is once a week or once a month, a leader reaches out to their Salesforce and goes, would you please update your freaking CRM? And so data gets in there and it's up to date for a day, but it's missing for the other 29 days. So if part of that feedback loop is that salespeople have to update sales leaders and marketing, sales people aren't very good at that, don't care about that, and nobody's making them do it. There's a big accountability problem. And I think that's another part of
where most CRMs, that's where in some ways, I want to say it's change management, but CRM's been around for so long that it shouldn't be that conversation anymore. It should be about holding these salespeople accountable. And, for example, at LinkedIn and any other company I'd been at, there was always a dashboard, and individual reps had a dashboard. The sales leadership had dashboards on all the reps, and in some instances, these dashboards were public, and they were on massive screens sitting on the sales floor. There was no denying that the stuff had to be measured, and it was in the rep's best interest to always make sure that was updated, because the last thing they want is to show zero. And that is the gamifying of that actually helps. Technology also plugs into a lot of this. So when you look at Salesforce or other CRMs that are in the market, there are other technologies that you can bake into it that make the adoption of the CRM a little bit easier. Because you're right, salespeople do not live in the CRM as much as they should. But how do you get them in there? You start providing them the insights and the information within the CRM so that they can do their work, they can become educated and actually do their activities and be living in the CRM at the same moment.
And what you're alluding to, although you didn't say it, is this has to be part of the culture. It's a culture of accountability and a culture of technology and a culture of using what's available. And a lot of companies don't have that culture. And they're afraid to hold their salespeople accountable. Because if they push too hard, oh my God, maybe the salespeople will quit because they don't like us anymore. And then we'll have to go hard.
Money.
The new ones are going to suck too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a transition into what I call the Dave Kurlan sales reps suck slide, which is coming up in just a minute. But because there's plenty of blame. Face it, there's plenty of blame on both sides of the coin here from a marketing and sales standpoint. And we'll come in just a minute to something that I agree with Koka on. I always say nobody built a statue to a committee, so it's going to come down to one person instilling the culture and following up and making sure that people's feet are held to the fire. My example, though, let's look at this from a sales rep's perspective. We had a very large client that generated 9,000 leads a year for sales. It's a very, very big company. And when I went to the VP of sales, I said, how many leads from marketing did you get last year? And he said, none. And I went to marketing and said, how many leads did you generate for sales last year? And they said 9,000. So I said, well, let's get to the bottom of this. Let's take a sample of the 9,000 leads and let's see, what's there. Maybe sales missed something. Who knows? So as it turns out, 1.28% of those leads were actually qualified, with close to 99% not being qualified. Now, what sales rep is going to update CRM on 9,000 leads, when only 1% of them are any good? So I mean, there's a situation. And by the way, the answer to that question was, from a sales perspective, was we got 0 leads. Marketing said those leads are still too important a source of opportunity for us, so we're just not going to have you qualify them. We're just going to send them straight to sales. So I always thought that was an interesting approach to this problem. I'm
if I ever heard a business case for marketing automation, that was it right there.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Now, finally, the follow-up sucks slide from Dave Kurlan. Dave, take it away.
Well, as you can see on the slide, there's at least 10 potential reasons why salespeople suck at follow-up. So you can see what the bullet points are. So I don't know that I have to read them off for you, but in the end, when it gets right down to it, salespeople don't sound like somebody that the prospect on the end would want to talk to. Their pace is bad. They're not passionate about what they're talking about. They don't know how to engage their prospects and get their attention and make it an interesting call. They sound like freaking salespeople. They call up, follow a script. Prospect immediately recognizes it's a salesperson making a bad follow-up call to pitch something. Don't want to leave what they're doing and blow the salesperson off the phone. That's if they ever reach the prospect in the first place. So, the details are on the slide, but that's the gist of what salespeople are doing wrong. They just don't know how to make that introductory call. They don't know how to ask what piqued somebody's interest. I noticed you just downloaded this white paper. What's going on in your company that made that so appealing to you? I noticed you asked for some samples on something. What do you have taking place right now that the samples might be able to help you with? Instead, they just go right into a horrible pitch. I'm so and so from this company, and we are in this business, and I wanted a call so that we could talk to see if there was possibly an interest in getting you to take a demo.
Yeah. And, just to add to that, I think, it's a lack of training. And, it amazes me at sales. In fact, especially after an event like Dreamforce, where there's so many people and so many vendors, like I'm still fielding phone calls and emails from salespeople because I stopped by the booth because I wanted to hear about what they offered. I mean, spend 2 minutes and look at my LinkedIn profile. Spend another minute and look at what else I've done in the space to get an understanding of, if your product or service even has a fit within what I'm doing. It's annoying to me. I mean, I try and educate them on the phone when they actually call me cold like this. But I mean, it doesn't take long for a salesperson to actually spend a few minutes to gain some insights on that individual. The technology exists. I mean, LinkedIn's one source of that. You look at somebody's profile, you can get a very good understanding of where they are in their organization, what they work on. Then you can start formalizing that opinion of why they might have been interested in that ebook. Maybe it's something that actually talks directly to their role and experience. It could be that they were just, getting some information they were going to hand it to their boss. But you start following these little breadcrumbs so that when you have a conversation, it's a lot more insightful. You're able to actually provide value on that first phone call, and it's not a sales pitch. Because the last thing, as David was saying, is you don't want to go in with the pitch. You want to go in either with some insight, some information on top of that ebook, on top of that sample that they weren't already aware of, so that they are inviting you in to start talking to them more about what your product or service offers. You don't want to go in there and just say, well, I saw you downloaded this. That mean that you want to buy this, so let's set up a demo. People get turned off by that stuff.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I'll give a pitch to somebody we probably all know. Ardith Albee has a book coming out called Digital Relevance in January, and it talks about that exact point. How do you take those crumbs and, feed their information needs as opposed to basically, like you said, setting up the demo.
Well, in fact, to touch on one other thing that you mentioned was this conviction piece. And this is something that I'm very passionate about and was actually just talking about this in a seminar recently. Sales reps need to get training to the point where they believe, like they are convinced that their product solves this problem. And until they do that, because most salespeople are on the phone, that conviction comes through tone of voice. It comes through your cadence. It comes through these all other nonverbal cues. And if you're not convinced that your product works, find another sales job because you're not going to be very successful, right? The person on the other end of the phone is going to hear this. They're going to believe it. They're going to say, this guy really knows his stuff, and he really thinks that this product is going to do it. I will invest some time into learning more. And a lot of salespeople just don't have that. Sorry, I didn't mean to rant.
Most.
No, that's good, and I bet you, Dave, you totally agree, right?
Definitely. I think it's that 74%.
Right. I'm gonna. Every one of the things on this slide, I think, are critically important to success moving forward, and we've talked about some of these. I'm going to go ahead and take the one that really rings out to me, and then ask you guys to comment on this slide as well. The one I'm going to talk about is the sixth one, which is don't ignore the value of the pipeline nurture and no response. There's actually, if you go to our homepage, there's an article called Mind the Gap, which has the ring formula, which is revenue minus inbound minus nurture equals the gap. And what I find is that the average company or the typical company might reach out to 1,000 companies and generate 50 leads, and 6 months later they go back out to the same 1,000 companies and might generate 50 more leads, but they rarely know kind of what the ROI is, and they rarely mine all of the value out of that first run through. And with taking a look at pipelines, which means it's not a lead, so it's not a short-term opportunity, but if we take one or two more steps and re-qualify it or wait for the right timing, we may turn that over as a lead to our client. And also with nurtures, what the value of nurtures is we've eliminated the 60% of the list that isn't worth talking to anymore. And we've identified those that are just nurture accounts that are really ripe for continuing follow-up. And what we've documented is you might take that 50 leads and actually generate more like 154 leads. So what my recommendation on this slide is don't ignore that value of all of the dispositions that aren't leads. And make sure that you identify the pipelines, identify the nurtures, resegment the no responses so that you can go back in there and generate the maximum number of leads as opposed to just going through once and generating, just a minimum number of leads. What about you guys on this slide?
Well, I'll tackle the fifth one, reheat. I'm always reheating. I think targeting has a place in this, and it gets lost a little bit if we use two extremes. On one side, let's say we have a company with 15 known potential customers on the planet. That's it. They either do business with these 15 companies or it's over. So they're not going to shotgun through those 15 companies. They're going to nurture and nurture and nurture the relationships throughout those companies, because if it isn't in those 15 companies, it's over for them. On the other side, the other spectrum, 180 degrees opposite, we have the companies where everybody is a prospect, and they shotgun through those prospects. Like, doesn't matter, it's almost like stockbrokers and the long distance phone companies. If this one doesn't buy, the next one will. So they're just going next, 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 next. Somewhere in the middle, there's a balance where we're not constantly calling the same people over and over again, and we're not just shotgunning through either. So I think we have to apply targeting to the reheating and to what you were talking about, Dan, and it needs to be reinvented, really. I don't want to take too much time, but one of the things we know about things that don't work is companies try to keep putting Band-Aids and glue and wire and mesh on these things that don't work, and they make it worse and more complicated. And it needs to be blown up, and we need to start over and build it right from scratch.
And
to your point, and Koka, just for one quick second to tag on to what Dave said, we have a client that focuses on I always love this. We focus on the Fortune 1000, and what they didn't do is they didn't identify 16 companies that are within one of those Fortune 1000 companies that are actually all individual revenue reporting subsidiaries that have autonomous decision-making capability. So you find some companies that say, well, here's my market, and if it's not one of the Fortune 1000, we're not interested in it. And in reality, and by the way, each of these 16 companies are over $1 billion in sales, so they're all relatively significant companies. But I totally agree with you as far as the targeting comment is concerned. Koka?
Yeah, and I was just going to add to that when you talk about reheating these leads is, what if when you're going after one of these 15 companies, one of these targeted accounts that you're going after, and trying to understand where you guys have where as a sales team you have the most penetration. So the ones that you have the biggest penetration into through connections and through other types of leveraging the database, the data that you have a higher propensity to get business out of that by leveraging those connections. Now, that's how you stack rank who you go after. But what if you could look at how your competitors are into those accounts as well? And if you can find out that, hey, this is a target account, it's number 6 on my list, but my competitors are even more penetrated into this account through connections than I am, that should be a call to action that I need to do more work. There's more activity to be done in that sector. And I think that again, taking sales from serendipity to science and start measuring this information that you have the ability to get now with technology where it is, and making decisions based on that.
Excellent
Koka,
point.
you mentioned a little while ago on point number 7 here that there's got to be somebody that's driving the process of improvement. Can you talk just a little bit more about that? We're right a little bit before 1:30, but can you talk a little bit more about what you thought about there?
About the committee fix? I think that
right.
There needs to be some consensus. And this goes right back to point number 1, which is what is the definition of a lead? Because if everybody's not understanding what a lead is, there's really going to be no real fix, because everybody's going to be trying to achieve something different. So understanding what that is, and then having somebody, it could be the marketing leadership. I mean, it depends on really how your company is already put in place. Some are very marketing driven, and some are very sales driven, and some are very just business driven, product driven. But understanding what that ultimate goal is, and if it's revenue, if you're at a point in your company where it's all about revenue and it sits within the sales team, the sales leadership, somebody within that leadership needs to be driving what that process looks like, and then marketing plugs into it and supports those initiatives. Support plugs into those. It's a whole life cycle that needs to happen. But again, I think it goes back to the number one of understanding what that initial lead is, and then what is the flow to turn them into your pipeline and into revenue.
I want to, as we continue our conversation, I want to get the contact information here up on the screen because we are here right at 1:30 or a little bit after. One of the questions that came up, and I invite the audience to ask any other questions they might hear if you have the time to stick around, is it goes back to culture. And I'll bet you that we could spend probably a couple hours talking about culture. This one was that the GE commercial culture is driven by process discipline and wallet impact for data accuracy in Salesforce CRM, which I thought was an eloquent way of putting the point. But do you guys want to say a little bit more about your ideas behind culture here as we wrap up?
I can start. Culture is a mindset, and it starts with imagining what we want that culture to be. What we want our people to be like, what we want our departments to be like, the attitude that we carry forward, the things that are important to us, the people that we're going to go after, how aggressively we're going to go after it, how professional we're going to be, the technology we're going to use, and the expectations around measuring all that stuff. So in my mind, culture is all about what we want it to be. And there's in every company we've evaluated, there's been an enormous gap between the ideal for a sales culture and where that sales organization is. It's typically at a gap of, they're at around a 40 compared to the 100, which would be an ideal. Just this enormous gap, whether it's on skills, on sales DNA, on motivation, on compatibility with the role, on performance, on use of technology, on you name it. So that's my take on culture. Koka?
Yeah, I think that's a great explanation for it. I mean, the company culture starts at the top. If your CEO is not exuding the culture of your company, nobody else is going to pick up on it. There may be people that see the poster on the wall or see the bullet points when you walk into the office about what the company stands for, but if it's not happening at an executive level and being indoctrinated within your company, it's going to get lost. And that becomes your culture. Companies that are very successful start with a vision. It's something that is probably not very attainable, but they know it's possible if they put the right resources behind it. That drives into their mission. And at LinkedIn, so the mission it being connecting the world's professionals and making them more successful, that is something that we believe that we are doing. The culture then breaks down from that, of being able to act like an owner, to have, to behave in certain ways. And that company culture, all of those items that we are supposed to believe in and exhibit as employees of this company, is something that is going to exude through our customers. People are going to know that this is what we believe in, and it's going to retain talent. I mean, being able to and then breaking it down to an individual department level, as a sales culture, what are you guys going to, are you cutthroat? Or you do whatever it takes to get the business in? Because if your leadership is behaving in that fashion, if they're saying do whatever it takes to get the business in, that is the wrong message for your culture, and that's what it will ultimately become. Treat the customer the right way. Bring them through the process. If it's not right for them, fine. We'll let them go. But that's part of the sales culture that needs to be brought in from the sales leadership and then indoctrinated through all the middle managers down to the reps, so that a rep feels comfortable saying, this was not the right deal. This was not going to work. This didn't close because they're buying this for the wrong reasons and they were going to fail. And we need to set our customers up for success. That's our culture. And I think that is where culture becomes extremely important, especially within a sales organization. How do you treat the customer?
And if I can add leaders, I think if there's one place where this whole thing breaks down, it's probably at the sales management level, where there's usually a lack of alignment between them and the sales leaders or the CEO above them. and it's not being communicated down to the ranks the way it's supposed to be. So there's a big misunderstanding about expectations, which in a lot of cases is why they don't get the results they're after.
Yeah, to sum up things here, 17 short years ago when I started PointClear, and after a 2-year non-compete, I said that, basically what we wanted to do was we wanted to have people who are nice, smart, curious, hardworking, and ethical. They call that Dan's big hand theory. And if people walk around our shop, so to speak, I say, just go sit with anybody because I think you're going to like them, and I think you're going to think they're good people. And that's what's kind of carried us along over the years. I want to thank you guys very much for joining us today. I think the audience got a lot of benefit out of it. And for now, I'm just going to sign off from PowerView Lives. I hope everybody enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.